Okay, this is part 3 of how to prevent heart failure and the Martin Pall No ONOO cycle related to his book explaining unexplained illness and his famous landmark paper on congestive heart failure saying that the No ONOO cycle is the central cause of heart failure. So this is part 3 of 3 parts. All right, so now I'm going to kind of go through how all of it works, the mechanistic stuff. So you'll be more solid on it, all right? So first of all, what is an antioxidant? An antioxidant is a molecule that donates an electron. A free radical is a molecule that has an unpaired electron in its outer orbital. In the outer orbital, these electrons should be paired, 2 of them together, 2 together, 2 together, okay? So what happens is these molecules are hyperreactive. They'll just react with other molecules, and when they steal electrons, and when they steal an electron, that new molecule then itself will become a free radical, and it'll initiate a chain reaction that can be very destructive. So what's an antioxidant? An antioxidant is a big molecule that has all of its electrons, and it can donate an electron to the free radical. But the unique thing about an antioxidant is once it donates an electron, it stays stable. It doesn't become hyperreactive. And the reason it can stay stable is it's so big that it can stabilize the charge, okay? It can handle it. So here's a neutralized free radical right here. The electron was given, and this will be the initial red electron that was a free radical, and now the new electron was given to it. So we'll talk about some of these antioxidants. You get antioxidants from plants. And then the other question is, well, what's oxidative stress? Oxidative stress is like a seesaw. There should normally be a balance where you've got more antioxidants than oxidants. When you start having more oxidants than antioxidants, then you start running all these damaging free radical chain reactions, okay? And your antioxidants, they come from plants primarily. Things like vitamin C, which is aqueous in water solution antioxidant, vitamin E. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of other ones, but that's basically the gist of it. What are the main reactive oxygen species and free radicals? There's the oxygen series of things like superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, hydroxyl radicals. And then there's the reactive nitrogen species, things like nitric oxide and peroxynitrite, okay? All right, here's an example of what vitamin E looks like. It's a very nonpolar molecule. What you mostly see is a whole bunch of carbons and hydrogens. It's a big molecule, so it can handle letting go of an electron, okay? And it's soluble in the plasma membranes and other membranes. Here's vitamin C, lots of oxygens all over the place, and that's going to cause a lot of polarity, so this is soluble in water, okay? But again, it's a big molecule. It's got a couple of double bonds on it, okay? It can handle giving up an electron. Okay, why do plants have so many antioxidants? Because they have to defend themselves with antioxidants. If you're out in the sun and it's real hot, 100 degrees outside, the animal, the human, walks in the shade underneath the tree, so then they don't have to bother with dealing with the sun's effects on them. Versus the plant, it can't walk under the tree, so it has to protect itself with its antioxidants from all kinds of oxidative stress. And when you eat the plant, you get the antioxidants from the plant. Okay, we got to talk a little bit about mitochondria, because mitochondria are the center of all this stuff. And by the way, I've had really smart, the best internal medicine doctors you can meet, and they say, Pete, I know you're right with all the videos you're making. You're talking about what we need to know, how to maintain our ion pumps in our plasma membranes, how to manage cytoplasmic calcium, how to optimize the function of our mitochondria, how to prevent atherosclerosis, prevent hypertension. We know you're right, man. We know you're right. It's freaking great, all the stuff you're doing. And I'm like, well, how come you never invite me to speak? We can't do that. We can't invite you to speak. I'm like, okay. That's how crazy it is. But anyways, I do appreciate them at least saying what they said. Okay. Okay, here's the outer mitochondrial membrane. Here is the intermembranous space, IMS. Outer mitochondrial membrane is OMM, and that's where the protons are pumped. The green membrane here is the inner mitochondrial membrane. The yellow is the mitochondrial matrix, okay? Protons are pumped from the matrix into the intermembranous space. And then the gradient will be built up here of protons, and that's used later on to harvest that to make ATP. Okay, so here is the Krebs cycle. The way it works is glucose comes into the cell, runs through glycolysis, end product is pyruvate. Pyruvate gets sent into the mitochondrial matrix. It runs through, it becomes acetyl-CoA, then it runs through Krebs cycle. A Krebs cycle, essentially, it's like a harvesting machine. You're going to chop off a CO2 that's going to be exhaled as a waste product. The real goal is to take these hydrogens off, and then, like a nuclear reactor, they're split in half. The atom is split into a proton from the center of it and an electron from the periphery, and we're going to use that to make energy in the mitochondria. So here it is splitting off the hydrogens, and then again, like I said, they're split into the protons and into their electrons. Okay, here's Krebs' cycle. This runs inside the mitochondrial matrix. I made a little mnemonic on how to remember it. We don't need to go into all the details of it. It's also called tricarboxylic cycle because citric acid is like a three carboxylic acid cycle, tricarboxylic acid, okay? And again, you're chopping off these CO2s as a waste product, blow them off, and then you really want these hydrogens, and then you're going to connect those to electron carriers, NADH, FADH2, and they're going to deliver those electrons to the electron transport chain on the inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay, here's the inner mitochondrial membrane, and what you're doing is you're taking the protons and you're pumping them into the intramembranous space to build up this big pressure gradient. And you're then running the electrons, handing them off from carrier to carrier, like rolling a snowball down a hill, like a fireman bucket brigade. And the reason is eventually they're going to get to the most aggressive grabber of electrons with the highest electronegativity, oxygen. It's going to take those electrons and be converted into water, another harmless product. And then a hydrogen will be allowed to come back through for ATP synthase, and the energy generated, it'll spin, is used to couple the adding a phosphate to ADP, adenosine diphosphate, as in 2 phosphates becomes adenosine triphosphate with 3 phosphates. Okay, and that's energy. That's how most energy in the human body is made. If it wasn't for this, there'd be no such thing as multicellular animals. This is what it's all about right here. Okay, now this inner mitochondrial membrane is so extraordinary. It has a gradient, the highest gradient I'm aware of in the human body, negative 160 millivolts. Holy crap. It's like an electrical power plant inside of your cells. It's a remarkable thing. Okay. And again, these are the electrons being passed down through these electron transporters. And then these are the protein complexes that pump protons into the intramembranous space. Once in a while, you'll leak an electron. It'll drop into the matrix. It'll hit an oxygen and convert that oxygen into a superoxide free radical with an unpaired electron in its outer orbital. Now, normally, superoxide dismutase, SOD, will rapidly take this superoxide and convert it into H2O2 initially and then into water. Okay, there's other steps, but that's what you need to know. And this is a very rapid reaction. The only thing faster than this, though, is if nitric oxide gets into our mitochondria, it can combine with superoxide and make peroxynitrite. Okay, you're going to need to know that. That's actually a big deal. And here's an example of it happening. So you've dropped an electron off a coenzyme Q, let's say, in the inner electron transport chain. It makes a superoxide. Normally that would be converted by superoxide dismutase into H2O2 and then further into H2O by catalase and glutathione peroxidase. But if there's nitric oxide lurking nearby, it can grab this superoxide and convert it into peroxynitrite, the monster, okay? Peroxynitrite, the monster, will then, trash the mitochondria, trash your cardiolipins. It'll get into the cytoplasm, trash things out there. It's the monster, okay? So this is you need to know how this works. So this is why you don't want excessive nitric oxide inside the arterial lumen. It's a great thing. It's antiplatelet inside the vascular smooth muscle. It's a great thing. Dilates the arteries, and that's what you get from endothelial nitric oxide. But this stuff creeping around in here is going to be coming from inducible nitric oxide, NOS, or from neuronal nitric oxide synthase in neurons when there's too much of it. Okay, because there's too much cytoplasmic calcium. Okay. I'm going through all this backstory stuff so that the more advanced stuff is going to make sense to you. Okay, I realize some of this is going to be pretty basic for you that have seen a lot of my lectures, but people need to know this stuff in order to get the more advanced stuff that's coming. Okay, here's the cell body of a neuron. The dendrites are the incoming. Dendrite means like tree. They look like tree branches. And the information comes in. Then it goes to the axon hillock, and it sends an axon potential down the neuron, and that then activates the axon terminal right here will release these neurotransmitter, NT for neurotransmitter, goes to the synaptic cleft, diffuses across the synaptic cleft, exerts an effect on the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, that's how it works. All right, here's the myelin that speeds up conduction. So the more myelinated a neuron is, the more rapid the conduction is. Conduction tends to jump to what are called nodes of Ranvier between the wrapping of myelin, and that speeds up conduction. It's called saltatory conduction. And then voltage-gated calcium channels are going to open up right here, and when the calcium floods in, that's what activates these neurotransmitter vesicles to travel to the plasma membrane of the synaptic cleft before they release their neurotransmitter. Okay, here is the sympathetic rage response for fight or flight. So the sympathetic, what's basically happening is your amygdala is firing at a rapid rate and you're real activated, and this is going to set out your sympathetic autonomic nervous system. You basically got a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight and a rage, anger, and all those types of emotions, okay? Whereas parasympathetic is rest and digest, feed and breed. It's the happy one. All right, so you want to spend more of your life in parasympathetic if you can. But anyways, this is when you get ramped up. When you get ramped up, you're going to be releasing a lot more cortisol into your blood, a lot more catecholamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline hormones, and more glutamate across your synapses. Your catecholamines are going to speed up your heart rate. They're going to increase your contractility, so they're going to hyperactivate your heart. So you don't want to have this be happening for no reason. All right, cortisol does a lot of things. One of the things it does is it increases glutamate release, okay, in your hippocampus, so it increases the activity of your neurons in your brain. It increases the lipids in your blood, the fats in your blood. It increases the blood glucose, so it's pro-diabetic, okay? You don't want this elevated all the time, or it increases your risk of becoming diabetic. But it's also going to increase your blood lipids. It's going to increase your blood glucose. It's going to increase your blood volume because it's going to cause sodium retention from your kidneys, and that's going to have an osmotic effect to pull more fluid into your blood vessels. It also suppresses your immune system, so you don't want that happening for no reason. Oh, here's the slide I was expecting to show you, and the point is that sodium channels conduct the action potential down the neuron, meaning the electrical signal. So a chemical signal is received at the dendrites. The neuron converts it into an electrical signal, firing an action potential, beginning here at the axon hillock, traveling down the axon. This long tubular part of the neuron is the axon. Then this is the axon terminal. And this right here, when this action potential reaches the calcium channel, this is a voltage-gated calcium channel, meaning that they'll have a depolarization. It'll be less negative, the charge, more towards positive. That will open up this calcium channel here. EMF will also open up this calcium channel. That will allow calcium to come into the synaptic terminal, and that will activate these neurotransmitter vesicles to travel to the synaptic cleft plasma membrane, release the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter floats across to the postsynaptic neurons receptors and activates it. Okay, that is neurotransmission. Okay, here it is in a little more detail. This is a neuron in your brain. About 90% of your cerebral cortex neurons are glutamate-type neurons. The glutamate travels across the cleft, binds the AMPA receptor first. That's a sodium channel. That depolarizes by letting sodium in the positive charges. You become less negative. Instead of being negative 65, you go to negative 40. And as you become less negative, less polarized, this is called depolarization, that leads to the magnesium bouncing out of the center of the NMDA channel, because there's no longer the strong negative charge for it to be attracted to. And then the NMDA channel is opened up and calcium flows in. And this happens all day long normally, and it's what should happen. However, there's a lot of modern things in the modern world which cause abnormal increase opening of the NMDA receptor. For example, if you're magnesium deficient, then you're not blocking these as effectively. You'll be more hyperexcitable. Okay, if you're eating the non-organic soy, you'd be getting more glycine in here, and glycine phosphate, glyphosate, and that can activate the NMDA receptor. If you eat a high-fat diet, I'll show it in the next picture, the other things that can happen here. Okay, and too much calcium gets into the cell, then you activate a bunch of bad stuff you don't want to activate. Okay, here's Martin Pall, and what he's saying is you got to watch out for excessive opening of your voltage-gated calcium channels, okay? And he said the voltage-gated calcium channel is very similar to opening up an NMDA channel. It can stay open a relatively large amount of time, and it can let in tons of calcium, okay? And then once all this calcium floods in, you can start activating your nitric oxide synthases and making a lot of nitric oxide that you don't want to make. Okay, we're not talking about the good stuff. We're talking about nitric oxide in a bad context. Instead of being Dr. Jekyll, it becomes Mr. Hyde, okay? And it's going to cause some problems. Prolonged opening of VGCC, voltage-gated calcium channels, and NMDA can let in tons of calcium into the cell cytoplasm. Okay, and this is Martin Pall giving his lectures. You can watch his lectures on YouTube. I think you'll like his lecture. You'll see just how smart he is, and also how dry and how boring and how narrow his emotional range is. But he's just like relentless. And this study, and this study, and this study, and it goes on and on. Okay, now here's a little more details about glutamate synapse in the brain. The glutamate comes across, we talked about that, depolarizes by letting sodium through the AMPA receptor, the sodium channel. That then depolarizes the neuron, goes from negative 65 to negative 40 and further positive. The magnesium bounces out. We talked about glyphosate can activate this NMDA channel. You also can get aspartame can activate this. Aspartate's an excitatory amino acid, can activate the NMDA channel. Glyphosate can activate the NMDA channel. And once this thing gets hyperactivated, beta amyloid protein will do it. When you're eating high-fat diets, you get an excessive insulin resistance, leading to excessive insulin produced by the pancreas, leading to insulin-degrading enzyme in the periphery being used up, clearing out the high insulin levels, and thus it's not available to clear out the beta amyloid. It clears out both normally, but it has higher affinity for the insulin. So beta amyloid will come from the periphery, go across the blood-brain barrier into the brain, and it'll activate these NMDA receptors, allowing more calcium into the cell. That's bad. Okay, peroxynitrite, when it's present, it'll start damaging the NMDA receptor and making it more patent. So all of these things are making it more excitable, pushing towards more and more calcium flooding into the cell. And when you get too much calcium in the cell, it causes problems. It'll activate calpain, a calcium-activated enzyme that's painful with bad consequences. That'll mess up the NOCA exchanger, and then you can't pump calcium out of the cell. Here's a NOCA exchanger. Normally it pumps a lot of calcium out of the cell very rapidly. Here's the plasma membrane potassium sodium ATPase pump. And this one typically pumps out 3 positive charges going out, but only brings in 2 positive charges of potassium. So that's how it maintains a negative gradient across the plasma membrane of the neuron. Also, it's a chemical gradient because you're pumping more sodium out than comes in. So sodium will have a chemical gradient of its own concentration. It's about 10 times higher outside than it is inside. And about half the neuron's energy, all of it, will be used for this pump, and some neurons 2/3 of it. So this is a very important thing. It's the electrical system of the plasma membrane. Okay, it's super important for a cell. And this is also why dietarily you want to eat plant foods, because they got lots of potassium, lots of magnesium, and they're relatively low in sodium. That's what you want. That's what the whole system's designed for, versus processed food and meat, that's preserved with sodium or flavored with sodium. It tends to be very high in sodium, low in potassium, low in magnesium. So it messes up these gradients, all right? Okay, yeah, like I said, this is the cornerstone of a happy functioning cell, to have a high diet of potassium and magnesium but low in sodium. That's what you want. All those pumps run optimally under those conditions. This is just a little more detail about this pump system. So this establishes a gradient, the potassium-sodium pump. Then the NOCA exchanger is when you want to get this calcium out of the cell. So calcium is like a light switch. When it goes up in the cytoplasm in its concentration, it activates things. Like it makes a neurotransmitter release its neurotransmitter. And a cardiac muscle, it makes the cardiac muscle contract. So you have to be able to turn it on and off real quick. And the way you turn it off quickly is you got the NOCA exchanger, and it's coupled to the electrochemical gradient produced by the potassium-sodium ATPase pump. And this one brings in 3 sodiums, because the sodiums really want to come in to equalize their chemical gradient, and because of their electrical attraction of their positive charge to the negative charge inside the cell. So then this is coupled to pumping out calcium, and you can pump out thousands of calciums in a second really fast. The NOCA exchanger is super fast. And you always need energy. So in this case, the energy originally came from the ATP used to run this pump. And this is called secondary active transport. Active means ATP was used to make it run. All right, so the calcium concentration is like 15,000 times higher in the extracellular matrix than it is inside the cell. So you're always going to need ATP energy to pump it out, okay? That's important to know. Okay, and then, Richard Moore, who wrote the best book ever written on blood pressure called The High Blood Pressure Solution, he talked about how you need to eat a minimum of at least 5 times more potassium than sodium in order to have your ion pumps run well and to help prevent high blood pressure. And preferably, I think our answer is probably 20 to 25 times more potassium than sodium. Okay, and I easily get that. I look at my diet because I eat a 100% vegan diet, whole foods. Okay, but that's why you want to do it. And I would say at a minimum, you want at least 10 times more potassium than sodium, versus the average American's eating like 10 or 15 times more sodium than potassium. So big surprise, they're hypertensive and they're beneath their academic, intellectual, physical potential. Okay, here's a little more detail about this ion pump system. All right, what I'm also going to show you in this one is that you also have a plasma membrane calcium ATPase, PMCA, runs on ATP, and it pumps calcium out into the cytoplasm. It's not as fast as the knockout exchanger. Knockout exchanger kicks butt, okay? 2,000 calcium pumped out per second. It's incredible, all right? And then also you got SERCA. SERCA means sarcoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, calcium ATPase. It's a pump for calcium. The sarcoplasm comes from the muscles. You can really just think of this as being the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and you have to pump the calcium out of the cytoplasm into here. It's a reservoir for calcium. It's bound to calcium binding proteins like calsequestrin. Okay, and that's a way to get calcium out of the cytoplasm. You have to get calcium out of the cytoplasm fast so that muscle can relax when it needs to relax. Let calcium in when it's time to contract, get it out, let it in, contract, relax, contract, relax. The heart's doing that constantly, you know, every second, all day long. Okay. And again, you need lots of ATP to make this all work. You need tons of ATP to run this potassium sodium ATP pump so that this gradient will be present that can be coupled to the knockout exchanger. And you need lots of ATP for the SERCA pump, lots of ATP for the plasma membrane calcium ATPase PMCA pump. The stuff I'm telling you, it's fundamental to life on Earth. It's fundamental to health. Every doctor should know this, but almost none do. Okay? All right. Modulation of the sarcoplasmic reticulum calcium ATPase by peroxynitrite. Peroxynitrite, bam, destroys the SERCA pump, okay? And that's a problem because that means calcium is going to keep drifting upward in the cytoplasm concentration. It's going to be harder to get it out of there, okay? And what protected it? Well, gee, having vitamin C helped protect it from oxidative stress and reduce glutathione, okay? So your antioxidants protect you. Where do your antioxidants come from? From eating plant foods. Okay, so now here's a little more details on glutamate. We don't need to go into this in too much detail, but what I'm trying to show you is there's two main sets of glutamate receptors. There's the ionotropic, ion meaning lets ions in. Ions are charged particles, and that's what we just talked about, the AMPA and the NMDA receptors for glutamate. Glu means glutamate in this context, okay? But there's also something called M-glutamate receptor, metabotropic glutamate receptors, and it's coupled to a G protein. So these are metabotropic G protein coupled receptors for glutamate. And they also activate a calcium pathway that's going to increase cytoplasm calcium, and it's going to have some additional slightly longer acting effects. We're not going to go into the more detail on it now, but I want you just to know that it exists, because you will hear about the difference between ionotropic receptors, they're very fast, and metabotropic receptors that have a slower calcium effect. Okay, and I'm giving you a little more detail, maybe too much, but just so you've heard it before, because if you start reading the papers on this, these things are going to come up. And here's the TRP receptors, okay? Now, these things can function in a good way for memory and learning and all the normal things humans do, but they can also be co-opted with some harmful things, and that can allow more calcium to come into these cell cytoplasms that we don't want, okay? And there's also something called the ryan-odine calcium channels on the endoplasmic reticulum and the IP3 calcium channels up there. And these let calcium out of the endoplasmic reticulum, because there are times when you will want to do that. But that's why SERCA has to be working to get the calcium back into the endoplasmic reticulum. I'm showing you these things about calcium metabolism because calcium metabolism is an essential thing. It's absolutely essential to having a general understanding of cell function, neuronal function, and protecting against brain damage and heart failure. Okay, you also have calcium channels called the TRPV1 channels, or also called TRPV1, V1 for vanilloid. These can be activated by alcohol, so alcohol messes up your calcium metabolism. You don't want to be drinking alcohol. It's for chumps. Volatile organic compounds will open up these channels, okay? Things that smell bad are, the volatile organic chemical is something that rapidly transitions from liquid to solid, like let's say paint. Paint goes from a liquid paint to dries and becomes a solid, and in that transition from liquid to solid, it gives off volatile organic chemicals. Okay, EMF will open up the TRPV1 channels. All this just puts more calcium in that cytoplasm. Again, the more calcium in the cytoplasm, the more you're hyperactivating the cell. And you don't want to do that unless it's for a good reason. If you hyperactivate a cell too much, you kill the cell. It can't handle it, and it just dies. It starts to fall apart. All these harmful reactions start to run, like activation of calpain. Okay, here's another paper about the monster peroxynitrite, how it destroys the plasma membrane calcium ATPase. Reactive oxygen species on brain synaptic plasma membrane calcium ATPase. Okay, peroxynitrite's a monster. You don't want to be making it. Okay, and like I said, when I talk about calcium, you know, this is like from the Lord of the Rings movie. One ring to rule them all. Okay, And calcium is it. It is the aristocrat of ions. Whereas magnesium, potassium, sodium, those are all the minimum wage manual laborers that take orders from calcium, okay? All roads lead to Rome. All roads inside the cell lead to calcium, okay? Lots of things want to push calcium up. So here's just an example of some of these things. Circuit inhibitors, you can't get calcium out of the cytoplasm, it goes up if your circuit pumps are inhibited. Mitochondria are inhibited, and that's a common problem. Then you can't make enough ATP to run your potassium sodium pumps, so you can't run your knockout exchanger. And you also don't have ATP for your circuit pump. You don't have ATP then for your plasma membrane calcium ATP. So mitochondrial dysfunction is a big deal. When it's severe, it leads to cell death. Okay, traumatic brain injury will lead to increased cytoplasm calcium. Cell phones, Wi-Fi, EMF. The nitric oxide pathway does too. We're kind of talking about that indirectly. Stress does, excessive psychological stress, sleep deprivation, raises the same hormones, cortisol and catecholamines. Caffeine does it as well. That's why drinking caffeine is for chumps. A lot of people think it's good for you. No, caffeine's not good for you. Okay, and then what about all those bullshitters that tell you caffeine is good for you? Well, you know what? It's a big commercial product. Okay, they're promoting a commercial product. I don't promote anything. I have no sponsors. My channel's not monetized. I'm ostracized from the whole conventional healthcare. I'm ostracized from the nutrition modified fat crowd. Okay, I'll tell you the truth. I'm a Christian. I want to prove I'm the best doctor in the world, so I'm gonna tell you guys the truth until the time comes when they crucify me upside down. Okay. Here's the excitotoxins. Here's MSG. Here's MFG, manufactured free glutamate, monosodium glutamate, aspartame, glyphosate. All right, aspartame. Oh, I got two aspartames in there. Well, okay, stimulants. Leaky gut causes problems. Leaky gums cause problems. Then you get the postprandial endotoxemia with subsequent amyloid clotting. And then you get activation of the microglia, and that activates all these harmful brain pathways due to neuroinflammation. If you're not eating the low-fat vegan diet, if you're not eating a vegan diet, you're going to be low in potassium and magnesium probably. All right, so anyways, if you got ischemia due to chronic atherosclerosis, chronic hypertension, chronic diabetes, high-fat diets, excess dietary sodium, you're going to end up, ischemia is going to cause decreased ATP production and going to end up in high cytoplasm calcium. I'm just making this point that once you realize how all these things are working against you, if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what will, to start getting your act together. And this is why all these people, they're like, well, hey, I just remember the other day I was a healthy 30-year-old, and all of a sudden they're a fat, sick, and stupid 50-year-old. Okay? And once they get sort of fat, sick, and stupid, most of the time it's over. They never get better. I can tell you, conventional medicine never cures these patients. That's why it's kind of depressing at times. It's like another, poor sick patient. Old guy fell, hit head. Old guy fell, hit head. I look at his jacket, and he's got 5 head CTs from falling, hitting his head. A couple months later, he's dead, fully demented. He's not even walking around anymore. I mean, it's sad. It's the same thing. I see it all day long, every day. It's like all these patients, they've all got the same thing. They're overweight. They're hypertensive. They're diabetic. That causes atherosclerosis, plugs up the arteries in their heart, their brain, their Johnson. They're miserable. They're sick. Their spine. And then they just, deteriorate, get a bunch of painful surgeries and die, or get cancer and die. Okay, and as far as I know, and I've been studying this for over 30 years, I'm a pretty smart doctor, and I can tell you, this is how it goes down. This is how it all goes down, all right? And most conventional docs, they mean well, but they don't know what to do to save you. You have to save yourself, and this is how you do it. All right. Because unless they learn nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology, they don't know the things that matter. So how can they tell you what to do? They don't know how to help themselves. I know lots of fat, sick doctors. Okay, we talked about EMF, opening up voltage-gated calcium channels. We talked about all these excitotoxins. I also got to mention psychiatric drugs often are excitotoxins. Lack of magnesium has an excitotoxin effect because it lets the NMDA receptors, the calcium channels, be open more. All right, some of this is repetitive from the last slide, but the point I wanted to make was when you inhibit your mitochondria, you're going to make more superoxides, and if you got all this calcium coming in the cytoplasm, you're going to crank up your neuronal nitric oxide synthase, and you're going to make a lot of nitric oxide, and that's then going to be combined with these superoxides made by the mitochondria inhibition problems and the hypoxia problems, and all of a sudden these two combine very fast, faster than SOD, superoxide dismutase, can get to this, and you're going to be making peroxynitrite, and peroxynitrite, the monster, is going to go around destroying things in your cell until it kills your cells. So you don't want it to get this far. And that's kind of my point, is you want to prevent all this stuff before you get to this point. This is sort of like garbage time at the end of the basketball game when, you know, the game's already decided. The cell's going down, okay? You don't want it to get to this point. You lose all those brain cells, then you're demented. You lose all those heart cells, then your heart's got no muscle function to pump. Okay, this is just showing, you know, that EMF opens up voltage-gated calcium channels, and then the progressive sequela from that. We know from Esselstyn you can reverse coronary artery disease. He talks about what a wonderful thing nitric oxide is, but he's talking about endothelial nitric oxide. He doesn't talk about neuronal or inducible because he knows nobody knows about those things. He probably doesn't know about them, okay? But I'm letting you know, nitric oxide is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a good guy from the endothelial cells inside your arteries. It's a good guy normally in small amounts in your neurons from neuronal nitric oxide synthase, but it's a bad guy from inducible nitric oxide from your microglia in your brain, from your immune cells elsewhere, when it's overactivated because of bad habits, okay? So this is Caldwell Esselstyn with all his quotes about nitric oxide, and he's got the best results of anybody in the world for preventing coronary artery disease, which will protect your heart. So I do think his advice is wonderful. I think it's great. I think he deserves a Nobel Prize. Not only will Caldwell Esselstyn never get a Nobel Prize, he will never even be mentioned in the conventional textbooks. All that he's done, he's not in the conventional textbooks. McDougall's not in the conventional textbooks. Kempner's not in the books. Burkitt's not in the book for abdominal pressure syndrome. He's just in it for Burkitt's lymphoma, okay? None of the big pioneers are in the books. And they're never going to allow them in the books because they don't want the young trainees to know about them. They just want them to sell drugs. Okay, here's a couple more consequences of excessive cytoplasmic calcium. And not only does it activate calpain, which destroys the NOCA exchanger, it also activates the neuronal nitric oxide synthase in excessive amounts when there's excessive cytoplasmic calcium. In small amounts, it's normal for this to happen, but when excessive calcium causes excessive activation of neuronal nitric oxide synthase, it'll produce too much nitric oxide, which is a gas, and it'll diffuse over to the mitochondria, go into the mitochondria, combine with the superoxides that are available, make peroxynitrite, and that'll start causing problems. Lipid peroxidation, trash in the mitochondria, like I talked about, and other problems. And pretty soon you're going to open up the mitochondrial transition pore, open up the permeability of the mitochondria, and it's dead, and the whole cell just goes into apoptosis. You don't want that. Okay, here's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll is the good guy with nitric oxide doing good things, and Mr. Hyde is the bad guy where it's doing bad things. And that's how, this is endothelial nitric oxide synthase, this is inducible nitric oxide synthase. You actually need it to fight an infection, but you don't want it turned on for no reason. So I was just explaining this because people are going to freak out. They go, well, I thought nitric oxide was a good thing. And it is a good thing in your arteries. It's a great thing with what Dr. Esselstyn's talking about, why you should eat a low-fat vegan diet with no oils. It's a great thing in your arteries. I remember it as nitric oxide synthase 3 because E, capital E, looks like the letter 3 on its side. Okay, I remember NOS is also NOS1. I just remember N is one letter. One has one part. You draw it with one continuous stroke. I remember iNOS is NOS2, nitric oxide synthase number 2, because the letter I has the dot on top and then the straight part, so it's two parts. And again, these are constitutive, meaning that they're elevated with increased cytoplasmic calcium, versus iNOS is inducible, more of a transcription thing, and that's activated in the context of inflammation, ischemia, and it stays on a long time, produces tons of nitric oxide. That's why, you don't want it. All right, and this was just a little joke when I talked about, when you have to think about something, you have to create a mental model. What am I dealing with? A metaphor, escalate the metaphor. So I love Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish Socrates, who would say, you cannot run a Hegelian dialectic on a lot of situations in life. You're either married or you're not. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're either a Christian or you're not. Okay? That's Soren Kierkegaard, either or. He wrote an entire book called Either Or about how people must commit if they ever want to do anything useful with their life. Then here's Hegel. And Hegel was kind of a crazy jerk, and Schopenhauer kicked his butt for philosophy in Germany. But Hegel did become famous for the Hegelian dialectic. And what he talked about is start with an initial idea. That's your thesis. And then have a contrasting idea. That's your antithesis, antithesis. And then instead of saying one's right and the other's wrong, combine them into a new synthesis. And what I'm saying is, for this context, sometimes the Hegelian dialectic works. And it works in this page. So here it is, the Hegelian question. Thesis plus antithesis, come up with a new synthesis. And so What I'm saying is this is true. The new synthesis is to understand endothelial nitric oxide synthase is good. Inducible nitric oxide synthase, other than in the context of fighting an infection and maybe removing cancer cells, it's bad. All right, because then it gets overactivated in the modern world because we got a lot of bad habits that didn't apply to our ancestors. So here's a little more detail about what this is all about. All right, so these are things that inhibit endothelial nitric oxide synthase and neuronal. If you're smoking cigarettes, bad idea. If you're sedentary, bad idea. If you have excessive blood lipids, bad. All these things inhibit nitric oxide synthase. That's bad for your arteries. Excessive dietary sodium, bad, bad, bad. Excessive high fructose corn syrup, because the uric acid will inhibit endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Okay, and then you have to watch out for uncouplers. Uncouplers are things that distort the shape of the enzyme so that instead of producing nitric oxide, it will produce superoxide. You don't want that. So if you're deficient in folate, you won't have enough to make your tetrahydrobiopterin. Also, deficiency in vitamin B12 can worsen this, and vitamin C. When you uncouple this, you're going to make an excess of superoxide. Not good, because it's going to end up combining with nitric. You're going to make an excess of superoxide, and you don't want to do that because that predisposes you to more peroxynitrite formation. Okay, NADPH oxidase will also make more superoxide. Diabetics tend to be making an excessive amount of superoxide. All right. What's the next point? The next point is what activates inducible nitric oxide. There's a little I. That means inducible nitric oxide synthase. And it's pretty much everything that starts with the letter I. If you have ischemia, where does ischemia come from? From eating high-fat diets, high-sodium diets, okay, high fructose corn syrup. So ischemia is bad. Infections are bad. Leaky gut leading to endotoxins, LPS and LTA. Inflammatory cytokines. Glyphosate worsens this whole process. If you're intoxicated with alcohol, if traumatic injuries will worsen this. So you get overactivation of the immune system. Excessive dietary sodium can overactivate the immune system. And you're going to be in the dietary advanced glycation end products can activate this after insulin resistance, okay? Some heavy metals can contribute to this. Anyways, all of these things activating inducible nitric oxide synthase, it can stay on for hours and just make tons and tons of nitric oxide, the gas diffusing around looking for superoxides to make peroxynitrite and destroy your cells. The endothelial nitric oxide synthase and neuronal nitric oxide synthase, they only stay on for seconds or most minutes. So they make small micromolar quantities, nanomolar quantities. NM is nanomolar quantities, versus this is micromolar quantities, orders of magnitude more, okay? Multiple orders of magnitude more. And that's why this can be a big disaster. Also, NOx, nitric oxide over here, this NOx, xanthine oxidase, system can also make an NADPH oxidase can make a lot more superoxidase too. This can be activated by LPS. You don't want that, and by advanced glycation end products. All right. This is just a little more about uncoupling. We'll skip that. Here's a normal synapse in a brain cell. We kind of talked about this a little, presynaptic, postsynaptic neuron. The only thing to get out of this one is that cortisol will also cause more release of glutamates here. And here's our voltage-gated calcium channel. All right. Here's going to be the astrocyte. So it's a tripartite synapse with the astrocyte being the third cell. Here's just a little more detail that you'll have microglia. That's the fourth cell of a synapse. So this is a typical bipartite synapse, but normally the astrocyte's going to be sitting right here. It helps clear the glutamate away from the synaptic cleft, converts it to glutamine. The glutamine's sent back, and then it's reconverted to glutamate in the neuron, in the presynaptic neuron. The microglia is the bodyguard, the security guard of the immune system. Okay, and you've got, macrophages, sentinel macrophages down in your other cells and dendritic cells protecting, your cardiac cells and other cells of your body. So anyways, this is how neuronal transmission works. Just a little more detail. We don't need to go into this for now, but if you get too much glutamate because you're oversending it or you're not clearing it effectively, it'll start activating these side receptors and again let too much calcium into the postsynaptic neuron. If you activate the microglia, the macrophages, the immune system, in an abnormal way because you got LPS and LTA coming across leaky gut, for example, or you have hypoxia, then it's going to start releasing glutamate. It's going to start releasing inducible nitric oxide synthase, related nitric oxide causing problems for your cells. Okay. Peroxynitrite gets loose. Here's peroxynitrite. Oh no. And it fits that its name's oh no. Destroys the mitochondria, big X across the mitochondria. Destroys plasma membrane calcium ATPase, big X across that. destroys the circuit pumps, big X across that. Now you can't get your calcium out of the cell, overactivation of the cell. You can't make ATP, so you can't run these pumps. Calcium just floods in, you can't get it out, continues, cell dies. Okay. Oh, here's an example of leaky gut. The LPS and LTA get into the blood. These are the bacterial endotoxins. The blood-brain barrier is usually leaky when the gut barrier is leaky. They come in, they activate the microglia, the immune system cells, and it then activates inducible nitric oxide synthase. What's happening is it has pattern recognition receptors, PRRs, and they sense the LPS and the LTA as an infection, so they want to immediately sterilize the area, releasing excessive amounts of nitric oxide to create these free radical reactions of oxidative stress to kill the bacteria. But when there's no bacteria there, there's just these toxins, and then you got all these nearby neurons. It kills normal neurons. That's why it causes brain damage, and it does damage in heart muscle as well. Okay, this was just showing you again all these mitochondrial inhibitors, how there's so many of them. There'll be none in the medical school biochemistry textbooks, and all of a sudden you read the literature, you'll quickly find over 50, or I could find 60 of them pretty fast. Okay, and we talked about dietary fiber protects the blood-brain barrier. There's one paper on it. Here's another paper on it. It's an essential thing to know. This is why I rewrote the guidelines for treatment of traumatic brain injury and stroke, that they should be feeding these patients high-fiber diets to maintain their gut barrier and their blood-brain barrier so they don't get leaky gut with toxins getting across the gut into the gaps in the blood-brain barrier due to the stroke itself. You know, worsening the brain damage, worsening the loss of the penumbra. Okay, and we kind of already showed this slide, how it all works. Okay, here's a paper about, Martin Pall wrote this paper about electromagnetic fields, how they activated voltage-gated calcium channels. Okay. Like I said, this guy Martin Pall, he's a genius. He figured out a lot of stuff. Traumatic brain injury also is going to increase cytoplasmic calcium. It's going to increase the amount of nitric oxide in cells. That can worsen collateral damage. Astrocytes are damaged by alcohol, worsens this whole process, increases inos, intoxication. I had written it as. That's why people say, oh, I want to get, stoned, drunk, drinking alcohol. Yeah, you are damaging your brain. You're damaging your brain cells. It's a very stupid thing to do. I don't drink alcohol at all. I think it's an absolutely stupid thing to do. This is showing voltage-gated, this is showing volatile organic compounds will cause oxidative stress, and they'll also lead to increased cytoplasmic calcium. They'll cause brain inflammation. BPA will uncouple endothelium and nitric oxide. This is the hard plastic, and that will also increase your risk of brain damage, cardiac damage. That's why you want to store your water in a glass bottle. So what can you do? We already talked about a lot of stuff here. Avoid all the mitochondrial inhibitors, and your mitochondria will work better. Eat your low-fat vegan diet. So the low-fat diet, you prevent hypertension, everything that goes with that. Low sodium, help prevent hypertension. The greens, like from the nitrates from your salads, those are nitric oxide precursors for endothelium nitric oxide, the good type. You'll open up your arteries, prevent atherosclerosis, okay? Potassium is a vasodilator, so is magnesium. Magnesium, M for magnesium, M for mellow. It mellows you out, it calms you down, reduces anxiety. It's nature's calcium channel blocker to block that NMDA receptor, the calcium channel of the NMDA receptor. Eat your starches. You satisfy your hunger with the fewest calories. That'll keep you skinny, okay? Nowadays, to be skinny after 45, that's a status symbol, okay? Most people are overweight after 40 years of age. And then you get all your antioxidants from the plants, so they scavenge the free radicals. Make sure you filter your water, get the F- out of there, it's a mitochondrial inhibitor. Get the Al out of there, mitochondrial inhibitor. Get those endocrine disrupting chemicals out of there, because a lot of them are mitochondrial inhibitors also, like the atrazine, for example, like the PCBs. And you'll also, remove the GP, okay? Get your sleep, because you restore yourself with your sleep. I told you the grounding's been helping me. I've been doing it. I haven't tested it, so I don't know, but I know I like it. Get your vitamin B12. You need that also to run your tetrahydrobiopterin stuff. You'll get your foliage that comes from the greens. Exercise when you can. That maintains your fitness, because the body's a use it or lose it system. You maintain your mitochondria. You get mitochondrial biogenesis, making more mitochondria from exercise, because it sends your body a message that you need to maintain high levels of fitness, because you're going to need to exercise more. So it will make you more mitochondria and maintain your capacity to make more mitochondria. Manage your stress, whatever it takes. Having a sense of purpose in life, it really helps you, because in life, you're guaranteed to suffer. You're guaranteed to have disappointments. So if you at least have a purpose, you're working towards a good thing, whatever that might be, helping your kids, being a coach, being a teacher, being a healthcare provider, it'll help you. And that's one of the things too. Like I said, my kid said to me, how could I be so happy when I work so much? And I'm like, well, I enjoy making these YouTube videos. I enjoy writing my book. I sort of feel like I've fulfilled my destiny by doing that. The promise I made to my mother and myself and God when I was in college. Okay, so I like it. This makes me happy. I wish I could actually work less in conventional medicine. I need the money right now because I'm paying for all my kids, tuitions and grad school tuitions and college tuitions and stuff like that. And I'm going to have to move. We're not going to get into all that stuff now. But anyways, all these stress management things and social support, friends, beautiful music, beautiful literature, beautiful art, all these things enjoy them. Nature, being out in nature, forest bathing, it's sometimes called. Get your sunshine. It'll increase your vitamin D, your systemic nitric oxide precursors released from your subcutaneous tissue, the sulfates in your glycocalyx. It's all good. Avoid all these toxic things. We talked about a lot about those. And so you do those things. There's been a whole bunch of case reports of reversing congestive heart failure. I told you all about those in my recent videos. That's getting the sulfates for the glycocalyx. I went through all this, how we can fight back against. So Martin Pall is not, his no ONO cycle is not invincible. It's already been defeated numerous times, and we know what to do, how to beat it. Walter Kempner was beating it back in the 1950s and 60s, but nobody understood why. Now I understand why, and I just told you. So this is doable. Okay, you want to live like Adam and Eve, but keep your indoor heating and plumbing. And I think that's just about it. Okay, so that's it. I hope that was helpful. That is how the Martin Pall nitric oxide peroxynitrite cycle damages brain cells and damages cardiac cells, causes congestive heart failure, causes dementia. But when you know what to do, we can stop those vicious cycles and maintain our brains, maintain our hearts. So hope that was helpful.